My name is Ellis Marsh. I'm 68 years old. For 31 years I've pushed a book cart through the Ash Grove Public Library. Most people think that's all I do. I shelve returns, I straighten spines. I know exactly where every title lives, down to the shelf and the row. That's what they see. That's all they've ever asked to see. They don't know I couldn't read a word until I was 26 years old. They don't know this library taught me. One patient afternoon at a time. Back when I was too ashamed to admit a grown man couldn't read a bus schedule. They don't know I own the building now. Every brick of it. Through a trust with my name buried 3 layers deep in the paperwork. My son-in-law Preston doesn't know either. Preston is the library board chair. He married my daughter Naomi 8 years ago. He wears good suits and better watches, and 3 weeks ago, my phone rang while I was closing up the reading room. It was Corinne Ashby, our head librarian. She's worked here for 18 years. Her voice was tight and low. I could hear her hands shaking through the phone, if that makes sense. Some fear travels through a wire just fine. "Ellis," she said, "you need to see what's on the board agenda for Thursday." I asked her what she meant. "Preston brought in a developer," she said. "Black Row Residential. They want to buy the building and the lot, turn it into condos." I sat down on the returns desk stool. My hands were still dusty from reshelving the biography section. "Sell it for what?" I asked. $38 million, she said. They'd build a reading nook into the lobby of the new condo tower and call that community Give Back. "Ellis, Preston thinks the board owns this building outright. He has no idea about the trust." I thanked her. I told her not to tell Preston I was coming. I hadn't sat in on a board meeting in 9 years. I liked staying in the background. It let me watch this place breathe without anyone treating me like a donor instead of a patron. And Preston, I think, liked me being invisible too. It let him build his reputation as the man modernizing a sleepy old library. Nobody ever asked who actually signed the checks that kept the lights on. That suited both of us, for very different reasons. But nobody keeps a library alive for free. Somebody always pays. I paid. I grew up on a farm 2 counties over. I was the youngest of 6. Nobody in my family finished more than the 8th grade. I dropped out at 15 to work a factory line. I hid my illiteracy for 11 years. I memorized labels instead of reading them. I nodded along in meetings I couldn't follow. Shame does strange things to a young man. It makes him clever at hiding. It makes him cruel to himself in private. I got very good at both. I remember standing in a grocery store once, staring at 2 cans that looked almost identical, unable to tell which one was soup and which one was dog food. I bought both and threw one away at home, alone, so nobody would ever know I couldn't tell the difference. That's the kind of thing shame teaches you to do. Small, quiet workarounds that eat at you more than anyone could ever see from the outside. When I was 26, a coworker caught me faking my way through a safety manual. Instead of laughing, she walked me 3 blocks to this library. She introduced me to a librarian named Miss Ochoa. Miss Ochoa spent 2 years teaching me to read after her shifts ended. She did it for nothing but the satisfaction of it. I never forgot that. 20 years later, my invention got picked up by a manufacturer. A valve seal I designed on the factory floor, of all things. I came into more money than a farm boy ever expects to see. I bought this building the year Miss Ochoa passed away. I put it in a trust. I never told the town it was me. I just started pushing a book cart. I wanted to be near it, not own it from a distance. Naomi doesn't fully know the story either. Preston certainly doesn't. I decided it was time that changed. I want to tell you about the day I got caught. I was 26. I was working the line next to a woman named Berta, who'd been at the plant longer than I had. A new safety manual came through. Everyone had to sign a form saying they'd read it. I signed mine the way I signed everything back then. Fast, confident, empty. Berta caught me holding the manual upside down. I hadn't even noticed. Years of hiding makes you sloppy in ways you don't expect. She didn't laugh. She didn't tell anyone. She just said, "Walk with me after shift." I almost didn't go. Shame makes you want to disappear, not follow a coworker 3 blocks to a building you'd always avoided. But something in her voice made me go anyway. She walked me straight to the Ashgrove Public Library. She introduced me to a librarian named Miss Ochoa. Berta told her, plainly, in front of me, "This man needs to learn to read." And he's too proud to say so himself. I wanted to walk out that door and never come back. Miss Ochoa didn't let me. She sat me down at a small table near the biography section and asked me one question. "What do you want to read first?" Nobody had ever asked me that. Not once in 26 years. I told her I didn't know. She handed me a picture book about tools, because I worked with my hands, and she said we'd start there. We met after her shifts, twice a week for almost 2 years. She never once made me feel small for starting late. She just kept showing up. By the time I could read a full newspaper front to back, I understood something I'd never understood before. Knowledge isn't about being smart. It's about somebody being patient enough to hand it to you before you're ready to ask. I never forgot that debt. I decided to spend the rest of my life quietly paying it forward, one book cart at a time. The night before the gala, I walked the stacks alone after closing. Corinne let me stay late. I ran my hand along the spines in the section where Miss Ochoa first sat with me, sounding out words a grown man should already have known. I remembered how patient she was. I remembered promising myself, silently, that if I ever had the means, I'd make sure this place outlived both of us. Corinne found me there around 9 o'clock. "You don't have to do this tomorrow," she said. "There are quieter ways." "Maybe," I said. But Preston spent 8 years assuming quiet means empty. I think it's time he learned different. She didn't argue. She just squeezed my shoulder and turned off the lights behind us. The gala was Thursday night. Blackrow Residential had rented out the main reading room and filled it with catering tables and a string quartet, right where the children's section usually sits. A projector looped renderings of glass towers where the stacks used to be. A rooftop pool where the reference desk used to be. A concierge lounge where the periodicals room used to be. I put on my one good sweater. I walked in through the side entrance in my work shoes, because that's who I've always been at these things, the Shelver, standing near the coat rack, saying nothing. Preston was up front near the podium, laughing with 2 men in sharper suits than his own. He spotted me near the coat rack and didn't lower his voice at all. "Ellis," he said, loud enough for the men beside him to hear clearly, "you remember my father-in-law. He's just the Shelver here. Doesn't really weigh in on anything past the Dewey Decimal System." Both men chuckled. One of them gave me a polite, dismissive nod, the kind you give a coat check attendant. I felt that one land. 31 years of keeping this library alive, and I was just the Shelver who didn't weigh in past the Dewey Decimal System. I didn't say a word. I found a chair near the back, next to the biography shelf I knew better than my own reflection. I sat down. I waited. A young library aide named Desmond found me there a few minutes later, carrying a tray of drinks he wasn't supposed to be serving to patrons. "You okay, Mr. Marsh?" he asked. "You've got a look on your face." "I'm fine," I said, just listening. He nodded and moved on, the way young people do when they sense something in an old man they can't quite name. I looked around the room. I saw faces I'd known for decades. Board members who nodded to me in the hallway every week without ever once asking my last name. A city councilman posing for photos in front of the rendering screen. My daughter Naomi was seated near the front, 3 rows from Preston, scrolling her phone, unaware that her father was about to upend her husband's whole evening. I hadn't told Naomi what I was planning. I debated it for days. In the end, I decided she deserved to hear the truth the same way Preston would all at once, without warning. The way I'd carried it for 31 years without warning anyone at all. I found out later, from Corinne, why Preston pushed this deal so hard. His firm had lost 2 big clients that year. He needed a win. A splashy redevelopment with his name attached would have looked good in front of his partners. I don't say that to excuse him. I say it because it helped me understand him better once the anger cooled. Preston wasn't cruel by nature. He was scared, the way ambitious men get scared, and he made a scared man's mistake in public. I didn't know any of that the night of the gala, though. That night, all I knew was the word Shelver, said with a laugh, in front of strangers. The developer's rep took the podium first. Sharp suit, sharper slides. He talked about activating underutilized civic space. He talked about 21st century placemaking. He said the $38 million would fund a digital literacy hub 2 towns over, inside a strip mall, with none of the character or the history of the building we were standing in. Then Preston got up. He talked about progress. He talked about honoring the library's legacy while embracing smart redevelopment. He said the vote tonight was mostly a formality since the board, in his words, holds clear title to the property, no encumbrances. That was the moment I stood up from my chair. A few heads turned at the sound of my knees. "Preston," I said, "can I ask a question?" He smiled the easy smile you give a father-in-law you've never once taken seriously. "Sure, Ellis, go ahead." "Who exactly holds title to this building?" I said. "Clear," you said. "The library board," he said, "has for as long as I've been chair." I nodded. I reached into my sweater pocket. I pulled out a folded copy of the deed, 31 years old, soft at the creases from being checked once a year. Every year. Just to make sure it was still real. "This building," I said, "is owned by the Ochoa Literacy Trust. Established 31 years ago. I'm the sole trustee." The room went silent the way a library goes silent when a child drops a stack of books. "That's not possible," Preston said. His smile hadn't caught up with his eyes yet. "It's very possible," I said. "I bought this building the year my teacher, Miss Ochoa, passed away. I paid for the roof repairs in 2003. I paid for the digital catalog system in 2011. Every renovation this board has ever approved, I quietly funded through a trust with my name on it. Not the board's. Never the board's." Corinne, standing near the reference desk, pressed her hand to her mouth. "You can't sell what you don't own, Preston," I said, as gently as I could manage, in front of that whole room. "And I don't own a condo tower. I own a library." The developer's rep started talking fast, something about pre-existing easements and title insurance. I let him talk. Insurance doesn't cover a deed nobody thought to check, because nobody imagined the Shelver held the paper. Preston found his footing again. "Ellis, this deal funds real modernization. This is the future of public access." "The future," I said, "is a kid who can't afford a computer at home walking 3 blocks to read for free. Not a strip mall hub 2 towns over that half our patrons can't reach without a car." Someone near the front started clapping. It was Desmond, the aide, tray still in his hands. Others followed. The applause rolled through the reading room like something the building itself had been waiting to release. Preston's face went through several colors. Embarrassment first, then anger, then, finally, something that looked almost like shame. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he said. Quieter now, meant just for me, though the microphone up front was still hot and half the room heard him anyway. "Because you never asked," I said. "You asked about circulation numbers. You asked about grant deadlines. You asked about foot traffic. You never once asked who actually owned the roof over your head, not at any of these meetings. I let you build your reputation thinking this place ran on nothing but goodwill. That's on me, too. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't only trying to save the library that night. Part of me wanted Preston to feel, Just once, as small as he'd made me feel by the coat rack for 8 straight years. I'm not proud of wanting that, but I'm telling you the truth. A board member named Rosalind Fenn stood up before any vote could happen. She'd served on the board 9 years. She looked straight at Preston. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, using his last name the way people do when they're about to be formal and serious, "did you draft this sale without confirming who holds title first?" Preston's jaw tightened. "I was told the board held clear ownership." "Told by whom?" He hesitated. The pause answered the question better than words could have. "Nobody told me directly," he finally admitted. "I assumed it. I've chaired this board 6 years. I never had a reason to think otherwise." Rosalind turned toward the developer's rep. "Did your firm's due diligence not catch a 31-year-old trust filing on a property this valuable?" The rep tugged at his collar and mumbled something about county record gaps. Nobody believed him. I certainly didn't. I think the truth was simpler than any excuse he could offer. Nobody expects the man with the book cart to be the reason a deal like this collapses. An older board member, Whitfield, leaned toward Preston. "Son, I think we pull this from tonight's agenda entirely, and we do it now. The board tabled the sale that night. My deed mattered, but Corinne is the one who truly turned the room. She stood up after me and read circulation numbers from the last decade literacy program enrollment, free tutoring hours, computer access for families without internet at home. Numbers no glass tower 2 towns over could ever replace. The room didn't need me to be a hero. It needed the truth laid out plainly, and once it was there, the vote fell apart on its own. Blackrow Residential withdrew their offer within the week. Word travels fast when a $38 million deal collapses over a trust deed nobody bothered to search for. The local paper ran the story 2 days later, with my name spelled correctly this time, thank goodness. Corinne texted me the article with a string of exclamation points. Desmond printed it out and taped it to the staff room corkboard, right under the community hours schedule. Strangers started stopping me near the checkout desk. A mother with 2 kids in tow thanked me for keeping the library open, though she had no idea still that it was really me who'd kept it. I didn't correct her. I just nodded and told her I hoped her kids loved reading as much as I'd learned to. Whitfield, the older board member, caught me in the hallway a few days later. 42 years hiding a story like that, he said, shaking his head. "I've known you 9 years, Ellis. I had no idea." "That was the point," I told him. "Nobody was supposed to know." "Well," he said, "I'm glad we finally do. Naomi called me the morning after the gala. She'd stayed quiet the whole ride home, she told me, too stunned to speak. 'Dad,' she said, 'why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Not the trust, not the reading. None of it.' I was ashamed, I told her honestly. For most of my life, being the man who couldn't read felt like the only true thing about me. Everything after that felt like it was built on borrowed time. 'You built me a whole childhood,' she said, 'and I never once knew my father taught himself to read at 26. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard.' I didn't have an answer for that. I just cried on the phone, quietly, the way men my age were taught never to do. Preston didn't call me for 5 days. On the 6th day, he came by the library after closing. Not in a suit. In jeans, hands in his pockets, looking younger than I'd seen him look in years. He found me in the biography section, the one Corinne had let me sit in the night before the gala. 'I need you to explain it to me,' he said. 'All of it. Not the version from the meeting.' So I told him. I told him about the factory floor, about the shame of hiding a secret for 11 years. I told him about Miss Ochoa and the patience she gave a grown man who should have already known how to read. I told him about the valve seal patent, about the money that came from it, about the promise I made myself the year she died. I told him I never talked about any of it. Talking about it meant admitting how ashamed I'd been for most of my life. Shame like that doesn't heal quickly. Mine had stayed quiet for over 40 years. 40 years is a long time to carry something alone, Preston said. It is, I said, but it's the only way I knew how. My father never talked about his failures either. I learned silence from him the way you probably learned ambition from yours. He sat down across from me, right there on the floor between the stacks, the way you sit when a conversation is too heavy for chairs. I called you the Shelver, he said, in front of investors. You did, I said. I'm sorry, Ellis, I know. We sat there a long while, surrounded by the spines I'd learned to read one at a time, decades ago. Eventually he asked the question I'd been waiting years for somebody in my family to ask. Why did you never tell Naomi? Or me? Because I was ashamed of the beginning of the story, I said. It's easier to be the quiet Shelver than the man who couldn't read at 26. I let the ending, the trust, the money, the ownership stay hidden along with the beginning. I didn't know how to tell you one part without telling you all of it. Tell me all of it now, he said. I want to understand what this place actually is. 3 months later, I added Preston as a co-trustee. He doesn't get final say over the building, that stays mine until I'm gone. But he sits with me now when real decisions get made. He's read the trust papers. He's seen Miss Ochoa's name on the founding documents. He understands, finally, that this library was never a line on a spreadsheet. It was a debt I spent my whole adult life trying to repay. The condo deal is dead. Blackrow Residential moved on to another town, I imagine. Developers always do. Our library still stands exactly where it's always stood, 3 blocks from the old factory floor, where I once hid a secret that nearly followed me to my grave. Corinne still runs the front desk. She still calls me Ellis, not the Shelver, which means more to me than she probably realizes. Desmond asked me last month to teach him how the old card catalog system worked, just out of curiosity. We spent an evening going through it together, drawer by drawer. It reminded me of Miss Ochoa, patient and unhurried, teaching someone something worth knowing for no reason but the joy of passing it on. Naomi started volunteering on Saturdays. She reads picture books to kids in the same corner where Berta once walked me through that door 42 years ago. She told me it's her favorite hour of the week now. I believe her. I watched her read to a room full of 5-year-olds last Saturday. Patient in exactly the way Miss Ochoa used to be. I thought, quietly, that some things really do skip a generation and land right where they're needed. Preston sat in on his first literacy program budget meeting last month. He asked good questions. He listened more than he talked, which is new for him, and which I mean as a genuine compliment. He's slower to assume things now. That, more than any apology, is how I know the lesson actually landed. Corinne told me last week that Preston asked her, unprompted, if the trust needed anything for next year's budget. 8 years married to my daughter, and that was the first time he'd ever asked me through her what the library actually needed instead of what it could become. Some men build monuments with their names carved in marble. I built a library. I let my own son-in-law believe it belonged to a faceless board for 8 straight years. I was too ashamed of where I started to explain how far I'd come. If there's one thing I'd tell you, watching wherever you're watching this, it's this. The quietest person in the room is sometimes the one holding the deed. Don't assume the man pushing the book cart has nothing worth knowing. He might own the whole building. He might have built it out of a shame he spent 40 years turning into something good. If you believe respect is earned in silence and paid back in full when it's least expected, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to The Forgotten Father if you want more stories like mine, real stories about fathers and grandfathers who let their actions speak long after the world stopped listening. And tell me in the comments, would you have stood up in that gala the way I did? Or would you have let the silence hold a little longer? I'll read every answer. This is Ellis Marsh, and this is my true story.